They discovered Elizabeth Ariano's body submerged, a heavy boulder anchoring her to the depths, a coarse rope cinched tightly around her throat. Yet, the man now in custody, charged with her capital murder, is none other than her own husband. In a chilling twist, just before his arrest, he was publicly posting about arranging her funeral. Steve, the horror began around 3:30 in the morning on April 16th. Two fishermen, out on the dark waters of Lake Worth, were startled by piercing screams. Moments later, they witnessed a silhouette plummet from the bridge into the lake below. The initial assumption was a tragic suicide, a 28-year-old mother of four leaping from the Loop 820 bridge spanning Lake Worth. But that was precisely the illusion someone wanted to create. A mother's grief becomes unbearable as she confronts the man accused of murdering her daughter, collapsing in anguish while the victim's enraged sisters unleash their fury. "You're an absolute monster. I despise you. I despise you." At 3:30 in the morning, a frantic 911 call comes in from a fisherman on Lake Worth who reports hearing horrifying screams. Seconds later, a massive splash echoed from beneath the Interstate 820 bridge. A fall from that height is a brutal 40-foot drop. Police, firefighters, and dive teams descended on the location, their lights cutting through the murky water as the search began. It didn't take long for them to make a grim discovery: the body of a woman clad in burgundy medical scrubs. A concrete block, weighing a staggering 119 pounds, was bound to her neck with a rope. This was no accident. The cause of death was drowning. The medical examiner would later confirm the most chilling detail: she had been alive when she hit the water. That single fact transformed the tragedy into a scene of unimaginable horror. The victim was soon identified as 28-year-old Elizabeth Ariano, a dedicated medical assistant and a mother to four young children. Only hours before, she had returned from an evening out with colleagues, leaving her car parked just outside her parents' home. Inside the vehicle, the key remained in the ignition. Her phone rested on the passenger seat, but Elizabeth had vanished. Investigators immediately turned their focus to her inner circle, starting with her estranged husband. He claimed he was home all night, insisting he had no idea what had become of his wife. But cell phone tower pings and surveillance footage swiftly began to dismantle his alibi, and piece by piece, a terrifying reality began to emerge for investigators. Someone lay in wait for Elizabeth near her home that night. And this person knew her intimately, the one who had held her hand through joyful times and comforted her in moments of fear. The predator was her own husband. Hey everyone, can I pause the story for just a second? I'm fascinated to know where you're all tuning in from. So, I have a quick question for you. Could you drop the city you're watching from and what time it is there right now? Honestly, it would be incredible to see the global community we have here. Thank you so much for doing that. Just pop it into the comments below, and we'll dive right back into the case. Our story takes place in Fort Worth, Texas. This is a bustling, rapidly expanding city in the state's northern region, a place steeped in rich history with countless attractions. Nearly 1 million people reside here, and among them was 28-year-old Elizabeth Ariano, born on August 16, 1987, in her hometown of Fort Worth. Elizabeth was raised within a large, affectionate family. She shared an unbreakable bond with her two sisters, Johanna and Alejandra. They were the type of siblings who were each other's constant support. Though her parents eventually went their separate ways, Elizabeth remained exceptionally close with her mother, Juanita, and her stepfather, Fidel. He embraced her as his own daughter. He would later recall how Elizabeth always treated him with profound respect, a sentiment he returned in equal measure. Their connection was every bit as powerful as that of any biological father and daughter. For Elizabeth, family was paramount. She was a selfless soul, constantly prioritizing the needs of others and always extending a helping hand. During her time as a student at Diamond Hill Jarvis High School, she crossed paths with Rodolfo Ariano, known to most as Rudy. They began dating, and as time passed, their bond deepened. In time, they married and started a family, welcoming 4 children into the world. 3 sons and 1 daughter. Elizabeth was an utterly devoted mother. Her mission was to raise her children to be courteous and compassionate individuals, and she embodied those values for them daily. Her faith was also a cornerstone of her life. Elizabeth was a devout Christian who attended church services regularly. This compassionate and giving spirit was also evident in her professional life. For several years, she had served as a medical assistant, a career that brought her immense pride. Her existence appeared to be complete. She had 4 beautiful children and a stable career. To any outside observer, her life seemed perfect. But behind closed doors, her marriage to Rudy was crumbling under the weight of his controlling nature. Model. In April of 2016, after 13 years of marriage, Elizabeth made a shattering decision. She filed for divorce. She took the children, left the family home behind, and moved back under her parents' roof. Elizabeth was poised to begin a new life, bracing herself for whatever came next. It was a terrifying choice, but deep in her soul, she knew it was the only one she could make. Despite the marital chaos, on that day, Elizabeth radiated a visible happiness, appearing serene and genuinely uplifted. That night, she met a few colleagues at a local bar, a small celebration to mark her first taste of freedom. After a few hours of welcome distraction, she headed for her parents' home in the early morning hours of April 16th. She pulled her car up to the curb, just outside the house. A final text to a coworker confirmed she was home safe, but when the sun rose that morning, Elizabeth's mother, Juanita, would make a chilling discovery. Elizabeth was gone. Juanita searched the entire property in a panic, but her daughter was nowhere in sight. Then, stepping outside, Juanita saw Elizabeth's vehicle, sitting there like a ghost. Inside were personal items, things a person would never leave behind. Her cell phone was lying on the passenger seat, a silent testament. The keys were still hanging in the ignition, an act completely out of character for Elizabeth. There was absolutely no chance she would vanish without a word, without telling anyone her plans. And more than anything, she would never, ever abandon her children. It was as if she had driven home and simply ceased to exist. A cold dread seized her mother. Something was terribly wrong. She immediately reported her daughter missing to the police. When officers arrived, they wasted no time, launching a full-scale missing person investigation. Detectives had one priority: to piece together a timeline of Elizabeth's final fateful hours. Their work began with those closest to her, starting with the man at the center of it all, her estranged husband, Rudy. At his home, police confronted him. He claimed the last time he'd heard from Elizabeth was at 2:39 that same morning, the very morning she disappeared. A call, he said, that took place after she arrived home from her night with friends. Rudy's story was that Elizabeth called to say she was home and was about to bring the children to his place. He further claimed that her plan, after dropping off the kids, was to check into a hotel for the night. Rudy told police that when she never arrived, he just assumed she'd changed her mind. Investigators now needed to dismantle Rudy's story, to confirm his alibi or expose him as their prime suspect. He insisted he had been with a friend all day, returning home just before midnight. From that point forward, he alleged, he remained inside his house until 7:30 in the morning. But while the search for Elizabeth raged on, a new piece of information surfaced that would change everything. A frantic 911 call, placed hours before, at 3:30 that very morning. It looks like there was something tied to them. They were definitely tied to something. Yeah, they plunged into the water and were gone. The desperate call came from a fisherman out on Lake Worth. The drop from the Interstate 820 bridge is a terrifying 40-foot plunge. A witness later recalled hearing a horrifying scream as something fell. That one call sent police units racing toward the bridge. With firefighters and dive teams, they began a grim search of the murky water below. And in the darkness, they found something. From the cold depths, they pulled the body of a woman. She was still dressed in the burgundy medical scrubs from her job. It was Elizabeth Ariano. As they brought her to the surface, a truly horrific detail emerged. A concrete block weighing 119 pounds was tied around her neck. The Tarrant County Medical Examiner's ruling was swift and absolute: homicide. The official cause of death was drowning, the massive weight having dragged her into the abyss. The block was a brutal anchor, a calculated attempt to ensure her body would sink and never be found. Police would later state, "We believe this was an attempt to hide the body, but the most monstrous truth was that she had still been alive when she entered the water." Elizabeth Ariano had been murdered, her life stolen with a savagery that shocked even the most hardened investigators. These were officers who had seen the worst of humanity, but the sheer cruelty of this act would haunt them for years to come. The very act itself, the sheer brutality of the crime, sent a chill through even the most hardened investigators, men and women who had seen the absolute worst of humanity. But this was different. It was a blaring signal that they were hunting a predator of extreme violence and cunning. And with that realization, the clock began to tick furiously. Every passing hour gave the killer a greater lead. They knew with chilling certainty that a person capable of such savagery would not hesitate to kill again. The team went into overdrive, working around the clock, poring over statements, dissecting forensic evidence, and frantically trying to piece together the victim's final moments. The mission was clear. This monster had to be caught, and fast. Investigators immediately began exploring every conceivable theory. In the first hours of a manhunt, nothing can be dismissed. They painstakingly retraced Elizabeth's final hours, searching for the precise moment danger entered her life. Did someone shadow her from the bar? She had been out with friends that night, and detectives dug deep into the terrifying possibility that a stranger had targeted her there, following her home in the darkness. Or was it a crime of pure opportunity? A random predator who saw her arrive home alone, seized the moment, and struck? That horrific scenario had to be considered. Or, in a far more sinister possibility, had someone been there waiting, lying in ambush, prepared for her arrival? The thought was deeply unsettling, for it meant the attack was not random. It was premeditated. The first order of business was to lock down everyone's locations at the time of death and start narrowing the pool of suspects. Detectives began to rigorously verify alibis, combing through phone records, re-interviewing every potential witness, and building a second-by-second timeline of the night. Because in cases like this, one tiny detail can crack the entire investigation wide open. Rudy, meanwhile, was adamant. He was at home the entire time and had absolutely nothing to do with it. He stuck to that story relentlessly in every interview, trying to convince police he never once left the house that night. As news of the murder ripped through the community, a wave of shock and disbelief followed. No one could fathom that such a savage act could happen in their quiet, safe town, so close to their own homes. Conversations erupted everywhere, between neighbors, on social media, and online forums, all consumed by one terrifying question. How could this happen here? One neighbor captured the collective anguish, telling CBS One, "How could someone do something like this? I don't understand how people can be so cruel and so evil to another person." A GoFundMe page was organized to help her family cover funeral costs. The response was immediate. Donations poured in from friends, colleagues, neighbors, and even total strangers moved by the tragedy. Every contribution was a small act of defiance against the darkness, a gesture of support for a family living through their worst nightmare. The fund quickly surpassed $11,000, a powerful testament to how deeply the tragedy had shaken the community. Rudy even shared the link to the fundraiser on his Facebook profile. Around that time, announcements for memorial services in Elizabeth's honor began to spread online. They were shared widely across every social media platform, a digital call for people to come together to celebrate her life and to wrap her grieving family in support. Soon after, friends and loved ones gathered for her funeral. On that day, the grief in the room was a physical weight. Mourners arrived in silence, holding each other, their quiet memories of Elizabeth broken only by muffled sobs and shed tears. Elizabeth's sister, Johanna, had picked out a turtleneck sweater for her to be buried in. The reason behind it was gut-wrenching. It was to conceal the horrific marks the rope had left on her neck. It was an agonizing decision, a final attempt to afford her sister some measure of dignity in her final farewell. They wanted people to remember the vibrant woman Elizabeth had been in life, not the victim of a monstrous crime. Drowning in sorrow, Johanna stood next to Rudy by her sister's casket. She gazed down at Elizabeth's face, her mind struggling to accept the horrifying reality. The moment was almost too much to bear. To stand there, surrounded by everyone who loved her, was to finally confront the fact that her sister was truly gone. But even as Rudy played the part of the grieving widower, investigators were beginning to see a different story unfold. Publicly, he projected an image of devastation, but in private interviews with detectives, a deeply disturbing picture was taking shape. They scrutinized his every word, his tone, his slightest reaction, but he seemed utterly devoid of anxiety. His responses were chillingly composed, almost as if he were discussing a stranger. There was no trace of concern. Even as they pressed him on the details of his wife's death, his composure remained unnervingly intact. Their marriage may have been collapsing, but this was a woman who had shared years of his life, The mother of his children? For the detectives, that profound lack of emotion wasn't just strange, it was a blaring red flag. Investigators expect to see anguish, shock, even panic in moments like these. His cool indifference was profoundly disturbing. To a seasoned investigator, that kind of behavior screams one thing: this man warrants a much, much closer look. As the murder investigation unfolded, a separate team began the painstaking work of pulling surveillance footage from every camera nearby. They meticulously sifted through every single available recording, their goal: to map the movements of every car, every person, in the hours she vanished. And then a breakthrough. At 3:02 in the morning, on the very morning Elizabeth disappeared, a camera caught the image of a white pickup truck pulling away from her parents' neighborhood. The footage was grainy, lasting only a few seconds, but it was more than enough to seize their attention. Because Rudy owned a white pickup truck, that fact slammed onto the detectives' radar. Later, it would be entered into an official affidavit. Investigators documented a chilling detail. The truck was heading on a direct path from where Elizabeth's car was last spotted to the remote location where her body would be found. It was a critical piece of the timeline, a chilling breadcrumb in the narrative of that terrible night. Rudy had a story. He swore he was home the entire night, but modern technology was beginning to tell a very different and far more sinister tale. Digital footprints don't lie. And in this case, the data was directly challenging every word of his alibi. His cell phone records placed him right there, pinging off towers near Elizabeth's parents' home on the very morning she vanished. He was precisely where he swore he wasn't. And as detectives dug deeper, the lies began to unravel. They unearthed another fact. On the evening of April 15th, the night Elizabeth was out with her friends, Rudy had been desperately trying to reach her. Detectives began meticulously rebuilding the timeline of his calls and texts. At one point, he texted her a pointed question: "When are you going to be done with work?" But the records revealed something else. When he sent that message, he wasn't at home. He was already near her job. The digital trail was painting a picture, tracing the path he took that night. For the investigators, these electronic breadcrumbs were becoming the backbone of their case. They proved he wasn't just calling her, he was physically close, shadowing her workplace at the very moment he was trying to make contact. He called again and again. Each call was met with silence. Every unanswered ring became another damning entry in the timeline investigators were piecing together. Taken in isolation, it could have been an innocent husband trying to reach his wife. But knowing what happened next, those calls took on a deeply sinister and premeditated quality. The data then showed him on the move, leaving her workplace and heading directly toward her parents' home, the place he knew she was now staying. He knew her routine. He knew her destination. It meant he could anticipate her every move, positioning himself to intercept her later that night. To the detectives, this wasn't just a detail, it was the key to understanding how the crime was executed. And a dark, disturbing portrait of a predator was beginning to emerge. Each new data point, every phone ping, every interview, was another piece of the puzzle locking into place. And the story they told completely dismantled Rudy Ariano's claims of innocence. But they still needed more. They needed something concrete to connect him directly to the act itself, something to shatter his lies completely. So they dug deeper into phone records and location data, re-interviewing witnesses, searching for any scrap of physical proof. The next logical step was to get a search warrant for his home. Investigators were searching for anything, a weapon, a piece of clothing, any object at all that could tie him to the murder. Every inch of the house was meticulously combed over, each item photographed and logged into evidence. Then, in a move detailed in the official affidavit, police made a difficult decision. They showed Elizabeth's eldest son the very rope used to bind the weight to his mother's body. They had to ask him a terrible question. Could this rope have come from his own home? The boy examined it, and then came the devastating confirmation. He knew that rope. He had seen it before. It was familiar. A memory surfaced of an almost identical rope, one he'd played with in the yard, and he recalled the moment it simply vanished. He remembered going to look for it one day, and it was just gone. Back then, the thought was fleeting, utterly insignificant, but now, that minor detail carried a terrifying new weight. Then, detectives presented a photograph of the concrete block. They watched his face, searching for a flicker of recognition, and they found it. He confirmed it looked exactly like the concrete debris that had been left in their yard after his father built a fence for a friend. The posts for that fence had been anchored in cement, and broken leftover pieces had remained on the property long after the job was finished. Identical concrete fragments were later discovered stashed inside Rudy's pickup truck. To the investigators, this was a devastating piece of the puzzle locking into place. The convergence of the material, its origin, and its horrific application was far too perfect to be dismissed as mere chance. As the damning evidence mounted, a dark narrative began to form. Elizabeth returned home that night, walking straight into a trap laid by her husband. Their theory held that he ambushed her in the darkness before she ever reached the safety of the house and abducted her. This chilling explanation suddenly caused many previously confusing details to snap into focus. Detectives believed he then drove her to the Interstate 820 bridge over Lake Worth, where he fastened the concrete slab around her neck and threw her over the edge. That, they concluded, was how she met her end in the cold, murky water. 10 days after his wife's body was pulled from the lake, Rudy Ariano was arrested and charged with her murder. By then, the chain of evidence they had built was more than strong enough to hold him. He was formally charged and held in the Mansfield City Jail on $500,000 bail. The arrest marked a solemn turning point for the community, propelling a case that had already shaken the public into the cold, formal process of the courts. Elizabeth Ariano was discovered with the rope savagely tied around her throat, her body dragged to the lakebed by a heavy stone. Now, her husband stands accused of her capital murder. In the days before his arrest, he was posting publicly on social media about arranging her funeral. Fox's Phil Alvarado is live from the scene with more. Phil: "Hi, Steve. It began in the dead of night, around 3:30 in the morning on April 16th. Two fishermen out on the dark waters of Lake Worth were jolted by blood-curdling screams, then saw a figure plummet from the bridge above into the water. It was meant to look as though the 28-year-old mother of four had jumped from the Loop 820 bridge. That was the grim illusion everyone was supposed to believe." Elizabeth Ariano's mother, Juanita Galvan, says in Spanish that she forgives the person responsible for her daughter's death because she refuses to let hatred poison her heart. She will not even utter her son-in-law's name. She was an amazing mother, a wonderful daughter, a devoted sister, and a beloved aunt. Our entire focus now is on honoring Elizabeth's memory, we called her Betty, and on protecting her children. Her family promises to raise them, but they are devastated without their mother. The very person they describe as the glue that held their family together is now gone forever. Someone must have witnessed something, because there are always people out there, you know? And if you saw anything, we are pleading with you to come forward. This is what she would want, for us to stand together and to take care of, to watch over her babies. And now, the Fort Worth police are officially echoing that plea to the public for anyone else who may have seen anything suspicious that night. They are urging those people to make a report. Doug, this family is shattered by grief, yet they are driven by a new powerful mission: to rally together for the couple's 4 children. But they also need the people of North Texas to remember that Elizabeth's life was so much more than the horror of her final moments. She was a beautiful, beautiful mother. And I must add, she was a beautiful daughter. To the world, she is a headline: Elizabeth Ariano, a victim whose body, bound with a rope and a concrete block, was recovered from Lake Worth. But everyone who knew her will tell you, my sister was always lit up by this incredible smile. She was constantly looking out for all of us. She was like a second mother to us, you know? That was just her way. That is why she was the very soul of this family. She and her husband had 4 children, aged 4 to 12, but the family is adamant they have not been orphaned. I had 3 children. Now, I have 7. We are all coming together as one family, my sister Alejandra and we are going to raise those kids. They are our only priority now. They are our entire world. A witness also spoke to the media, describing Rudy's chilling behavior the very next day. This account added another deeply unsettling layer to the events that transpired in the hours after the tragedy. According to this witness's harrowing account, Rudy's demeanor was chillingly composed, an eerie calm that defied the horror of the preceding hours. Anyone who encountered him that day was braced to see a man utterly broken by grief. They anticipated a raw display of sorrow, the tears, the anguish, the shattering loss of a loved one. Yet eyewitnesses reported seeing nothing of the sort. his conduct projected something else entirely. The profound agony expected of a husband who had just lost his wife was simply not there. In the days that followed, these unsettling observations became fodder for intense speculation among reporters and the public. Every small detail, every casual remark from those who crossed his path began to weave a sinister timeline leading to his eventual arrest and trial. And though each piece of this puzzle seemed insignificant on its own, they collectively formed a deeply disturbing portrait of his state of mind. A portrait that, as a court would later confirm, depicted a man at the very heart of this unspeakable tragedy. For many, these accounts solidified a chilling consensus. His reaction to Elizabeth's death was unnervingly cold, almost impossible to comprehend. One next-door neighbor, speaking anonymously, recalled the day after Elizabeth Ariano was murdered. Her husband was in his driveway, blasting music from his truck and drinking a beer. This, while her shattered family was just beginning to grapple with the monstrous reality of her death and the question of who could commit such an act. Their lives became a vortex of grief, a desperate quest for truth. Their days bled into one another, filled with grim meetings with detectives. They were glued to the news, clinging to any shred of information that could possibly make sense of the senseless violence. In the midst of their nightmare, they found the courage to face the cameras and speak about Elizabeth. They spoke of who she truly was, her boundless kindness, her deep compassion, and the immense void her absence left in the lives of all who cherished her. It was their way of fighting back, of ensuring her memory would outshine the brutal headlines that announced her death. Through it all, Rudy Ariano maintained his innocence, steadfastly denying any part in the crime. But as investigators painstakingly assembled the facts, his denials began to fray. With each new phase of the case, the pressure mounted relentlessly. The weight of evidence, the power of witness testimony, and the sheer logic of the crime scene were systematically dismantling his claims of innocence. Inevitably, a moment of reckoning arrived, a decision that would seal the fate of the entire case. Had he persisted in his plea of not guilty, forcing the matter to a full jury trial, a conviction was a terrifying possibility. And with it, the specter of the death penalty, the ultimate punishment. That stark reality became the fulcrum in tense negotiations involving the prosecution, his own defense team, and Elizabeth's grieving family. He finally relented, accepting a plea agreement that Elizabeth's family had also consented to. For them, it was a decision forged in agony. No court outcome could ever return their beloved daughter and sister and mother, but the deal offered a certainty. The ordeal would not be prolonged through years of appeals, and the man responsible would be held accountable, eliminating the risk of a different, more painful trial outcome. On Wednesday, January 30th, 2019, Rudy Ariano stood before the court and admitted his guilt in the abduction and murder of his wife Elizabeth. Inside that courtroom, the words that had hung in the air for so long were finally spoken, cementing a truth her family had already been forced to endure. His plea brought the legal conflict to its definitive conclusion. The agreement removed the death penalty from consideration, shifting the court's focus to sentencing a judgment that would lock away the rest of his days. It gave his wife's family an opportunity to confront him in court after he confessed to the crime. A grief-stricken mother buckled, coming face to face with her daughter's killer. The victim's sisters, seething with rage, also unleashed their pain. "You are a monster. I despise you. I despise you. You are nothing." Ariano's vacant expression stunned nearly everyone who learned the grim details of this crime. Even people who had known him for years were baffled by his complete lack of emotion in the aftermath of such horror. He seemed profoundly disconnected from reality, as if the nightmare that had unfolded had barely registered with him at all. For Elizabeth's loved ones and for a shocked public, this soulless detachment became one of the most agonizing and haunting elements of the entire story. But then, a detail emerged that cast an even deeper chill over the case. A mere 2 hours after he had savagely murdered the mother of his children, he shared a meme on Facebook. It asked, "How long can a person survive without alcohol before they die?" Below it, he typed his own comment, "I'm starting to get worried." That post became a damning piece of evidence for investigators and a horrifying glimpse into his mindset that day. Their model, to the world, his reaction was a chilling display of sheer indifference. Elizabeth's family was still completely in the dark. Her loved ones were going about their day, oblivious to the horror that had already descended. While he carried on as if nothing was wrong, the sheer audacity of that social media post felt like a phantom, A life had been brutally extinguished, a family's destiny shattered forever, and yet, there it was. A casual, careless update for the world to see. For so many people watching this unfold, it was the first terrifying glimpse of the cold-blooded cruelty that would define the entire case. And once the gruesome details became known, that single, fleeting post was seared into the public's memory as one of the most haunting elements of the entire ordeal. It exposed the vast, horrifying chasm between the monstrous reality of the crime and the unnerving composure of the man the court would ultimately hold responsible. He constructed the perfect facade of a devastated husband, a man utterly shattered by grief. He stood beside her casket, head bowed, weeping as if he too were just another victim. To everyone gathered to mourn Elizabeth, his agony appeared gut-wrenchingly authentic. They saw a husband who had just lost his entire world, but beneath that masterful performance of sorrow, a monstrous secret was hiding. He was looking into the eyes of people who cherished him, people he had known for years, and weaving a web of lies. He deceived friends and neighbors, all while accepting their sincere attempts to guide him through what they believed was his darkest hour. They absorbed his words. They offered him comfort. They tried to shoulder his unbearable loss. They were utterly oblivious, facing a man who concealed a devastating reality, the very person they had placed their absolute faith in, the one they followed without a flicker of doubt. And his silence was absolute. Even as the evidence mounted, as the horrifying truth could no longer be denied, he never offered a single reason for what he had done. He never articulated what pushed him past the brink, over that line from which there is no return. That suffocating silence became its own special kind of torture for those left behind. He never uttered an apology, not to Elizabeth's family, not to anyone who had been robbed of her light. There was no flicker of remorse, no acknowledgement of the profound devastation he had unleashed upon her loved ones. His complete absence of regret served as a final, brutal confirmation of the heartless nature of his crime. Ultimately, the court delivered its verdict. Rudy Ariano was condemned to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. That sentence brought the legal chapter of this nightmare to its definitive close. The court had decreed he would never again walk in society. He was to spend the remainder of his days behind bars. His own attorney would later say the plea deal was the only logical choice. He argued that it spared everyone the ordeal of a protracted, painful trial and guaranteed a final, decisive outcome. It also took the death penalty off the table entirely. For Elizabeth's family, there was a small measure of peace in the certainty that he could never again be free. It would not bring their daughter back, their sister, their mother, but it ensured the person who stole her future could never inflict such pain again. And though the agony of her absence will never fade, that knowledge provides at least a fragment of justice. During the sentencing, Elizabeth's sister, Johanna, delivered a raw and powerful victim impact statement. She spoke of the profound emptiness the tragedy had carved into their souls, of a family now permanently broken, and of lives forever, split into two distinct eras, the time before that night and the endless after. "You robbed all of us," she said, "from being able to enjoy the wonderful and beautiful human that she was. She will never get to see her kids grow up. She will be absent from every holiday, every high school graduation, and she will never know her future grandchildren. And most importantly, you stole her right to live, to be happy, and to continue being the great mother that she was. How dare you? How dare you take matters into your own hands?" Johanna then recalled the chilling moment she stood beside him at Elizabeth's funeral. "You knew what you had done, and yet you stood in front of her body and cried with me. On the day of her funeral, you told me you wished you were the one lying there instead of her, that you just wanted to be there beside her. You said that when you married her, you knew it meant till death do you part, but you never thought it would happen so soon. You're a coward." Elizabeth's stepfather, Fidel, also spoke of her children's unending sorrow. "The children cry often. They miss their mother very much. He ripped her from their lives, and now he is condemned to a lifetime in a cell, forever haunted by the future he stole from them. May her story never be forgotten. Thank you." Outside the courthouse, Elizabeth's family faced the cameras, their message unwavering. She drew breath for her children. They were her entire universe, and we will never stop speaking her name, not for a single day. We will honor her, we will celebrate her, and her memory will burn brightly. Always. Always. Elizabeth was a fiercely protective mother, a cherished daughter, a loyal sister, a beloved aunt, a steadfast friend, and a respected colleague. To her family, she was the anchor, the one person they could cling to in any storm. To her friends, she was that calming voice cutting through the chaos, arriving just as hope began to fade. And to her coworkers, she was the bedrock of dependability, a professional who refused to look away when someone was in need. The impact she made was immense, echoing through the lives she touched personally and the countless people she aided through her profession. She is remembered for a heart full of compassion and a smile that was utterly genuine. She was a person who understood the power of listening, of lifting others up, and of finding the precise words to ignite hope in the darkest of moments. Her very presence was a force. A single conversation with her was enough to leave you with a lingering sense of warmth, of true human connection. Her sister, Johanna, made a solemn vow that the family would be the keepers of her legacy, weaving her story into the lives of her children. For them, this became a silent, sacred pact. They need the children to know the sheer force of character Elizabeth possessed, not just from faded photographs or retold tales, but from the very principles she lived by: an unyielding love for her family, a deep-seated empathy for others, and an astonishing ability to project kindness into a harsh world. For every person who knew and loved her, she is seared into their memory as a compassionate, profound, and truly singular woman, a soul impossible to erase. Her name will resonate for generations, a constant presence in memories, in family lore, and in the stories that will be told year after relentless year. Because when a soul touches so many hearts, it does not vanish. It lives on, a part of everyone who ever knew her light.